3 months after I buried my husband of 44 years, my son stopped asking if I was sleeping okay. He stopped asking whether I'd eaten dinner. Instead, Eric kept showing up at my door with the same cold question, hiding behind different words. Dad didn't leave anything else behind, did he? What my son didn't know was that Michael and I owned a second house on the coast of Spain, a house my husband begged me to keep secret. And after what Eric tried to do to me next, I thank God every single day that I stayed quiet. If this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe. And I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole heart? Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there tonight. Sometimes knowing we're not alone helps more than people realize. People talk about grief like it arrives all at once, like a thunderstorm. Loud, violent, impossible to ignore. But for me, grief came quietly. It sat beside me at the kitchen table every morning, where Michael used to read the newspaper with his coffee. It followed me into the laundry room when I found one of his flannel shirts still hanging behind the door because neither of us had remembered to put it away before he died. It waited for me at night in our bed in the terrible emptiness where his warm body used to be. 44 years. That's how long I was married to Michael Hayes. 44 years of shared grocery lists, Sunday pancakes, arguments over paint colors, road trips through Tennessee with broken air conditioning, and holding hands during movies, even when we were too old to care whether it looked silly. And then one morning in October, he was just gone. A stroke. Fast. Merciless. Final. I still remember the sound I made in the hospital room after the doctor said there was nothing more they could do. It didn't even sound human. More like something breaking apart. After the funeral, people filled my house for almost a week. Neighbors brought casseroles. Church friends hugged me until my shoulders hurt. Women I barely knew pressed my hands and said things like, "He's in a better place now." But eventually, everybody leaves. That's the part nobody warns you about. The silence afterward. The unbearable silence. For the first month, I barely touched our bedroom. Michael's glasses stayed on the nightstand exactly where he left them. His slippers remained beside the bed. Some nights, I would sit in his recliner, holding my phone just to replay his old voicemails. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm stopping by the hardware store. Need anything? I must have listened to that message 50 times. Maybe more." Eric and Vanessa started visiting almost immediately after the funeral. At first, I was grateful for it. Truly grateful. My son hugged me tightly at the cemetery while I cried into his coat. Vanessa brought homemade lasagna and cleaned my kitchen without being asked. They insisted I shouldn't be alone too much. "Your family," Vanessa said softly one evening while wrapping leftovers in foil. "We're going to take care of you now." At the time, those words comforted me. Now they make my skin crawl. The first few weeks felt normal enough. Eric mowed my lawn. Vanessa organized some paperwork from the hospital bills. They helped me cancel Michael's phone line and sort through insurance forms because my mind was still foggy with grief. I remember feeling relieved that Michael had raised such a dependable son, but slowly, something changed. It started with small questions. Questions that sounded innocent if you didn't listen carefully. Did Dad ever update the will? Do you know how many savings accounts you two had? Are there any retirement investments we should know about? At first, I assumed Eric was simply trying to help. Financial matters had always overwhelmed me. Michael handled most of it during our marriage. Still, there was something strange about the way Eric asked those questions. Too focused, too rehearsed. He didn't ask how I was coping. He asked where documents were. One afternoon, Vanessa sat beside me at the kitchen table while I sorted old photographs into boxes. She smiled sympathetically and touched my hand. "This house must feel huge without Michael," she said. I glanced around the kitchen. The yellow curtains, the old clock above the stove, the scratch on the cabinet from when Eric crashed his toy truck into it at age 6. "It does," I admitted quietly. Vanessa nodded almost thoughtfully. "You know, eventually it might be easier to downsize." The comment hit me strangely. Michael had been dead barely 8 weeks. I forced a smile. I'm not ready for that. Of course not, she replied quickly. I just mean later. A senior living community could actually be wonderful for someone in your stage of life. Your stage of life. I can still hear the way she said it. Polite, gentle, like she was discussing a damaged piece of furniture. A few days later, Eric came over alone. He walked through the house slowly while talking to me, glancing into rooms in a way I couldn't quite explain. Evaluating. That was the word. He was evaluating everything. When he stepped into Michael's office, he paused beside the filing cabinet. Did Dad keep all the financial records in here? Something cold moved through my stomach. I suppose so, I answered carefully. Eric opened one drawer casually, pretending not to care too much. You know how complicated estates can get, he said. I just don't want people taking advantage of you. People. Plural. But there was no people. There was only him. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the dark television screen. Something deep inside me felt unsettled for the first time since Michael died. Not fear exactly, just instinct. The kind women my age learn not to ignore. A week later, things became worse. Vanessa arrived carrying coffee and pastries from a bakery downtown. She chatted pleasantly while helping me sort through more paperwork. Then suddenly, almost casually, she asked, did Michael own anything overseas? I looked up sharply. What? Anything overseas, she repeated smoothly. Property, investments, accounts. I laughed nervously. Why would you ask that? Oh, no reason. She smiled too quickly. Eric said Michael traveled a lot years ago for work. My heart started beating harder. Michael had worked in Spain years earlier. Barcelona first, then Valencia, and that was exactly where our secret house was. I kept my face calm and shook my head slowly. No, nothing like that. Vanessa studied me for 1 second too long before smiling again. Well, she said lightly, that certainly makes things simpler. Simpler. The word stayed with me all evening. Later that night, I walked into my bedroom and opened Michael's closet. Hidden behind an old shoebox was the small metal lockbox he had given me years ago. I touched it with trembling fingers. Inside were documents I had not looked at since before his death. The deed to the house in Spain, our hidden refuge, our secret. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I realized something horrifying. My husband hadn't only been protecting that house. He had been protecting me. After Vanessa asked whether Michael owned property overseas, I stopped sleeping well. Not because I thought they knew about Spain, but because I realized they were searching for something hidden. And once that understanding settled into my chest, I began noticing things I should have seen weeks earlier. The first thing was how often Eric and Vanessa suddenly wanted to help. Too much help can feel just as dangerous as neglect. Vanessa started showing up unannounced during the day, carrying groceries I never asked for. She reorganized my pantry without permission. She replaced labels on medication bottles because she claimed the print was too small for older eyes. Older eyes. Everything she said sounded caring on the surface, but underneath it there was always something else, something diminishing. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and found Vanessa taking pictures of my cabinets with her phone. She jumped slightly when she saw me. Oh, she laughed. I was showing a friend how charming your kitchen is. I smiled politely, but my stomach tightened. Why would her friend care about my kitchen cabinets? That evening, Eric arrived after work carrying Chinese takeout. We sat in the dining room, eating in near silence while rain tapped softly against the windows. Then out of nowhere, he said, have you thought any more about downsizing? I set my fork down slowly. No. He sighed heavily, like I was being difficult on purpose. Mom, this house is too much responsibility for you now. I've managed it for 30 years. You managed it with Dad? The words landed harder than he intended. Or maybe exactly as hard as he intended. I looked down at my untouched food. Your father hasn't even been gone 3 months. Eric rubbed his forehead impatiently. That's not what I mean. But it was. It absolutely was. Vanessa leaned forward gently. We're only trying to think ahead. Senior communities are wonderful now. They have activities, transportation, medical staff. I'm not moving, I interrupted quietly. Silence filled the room. For a moment, Eric stared at me with an expression I barely recognized. Not concern, not frustration, calculation. Then it disappeared. Okay, he said lightly. Nobody's forcing you. But something in my chest whispered that he was lying. A few days later, I noticed my front door wasn't latching properly. At first, I assumed the wood had swollen from the rain, but when I examined the lock closely, I realized tiny scratches surrounded the keyhole. Fresh scratches. My hands began to shake. That night, after Eric and Vanessa visited, I quietly tested something. Before bed, I placed a thin strand of sewing thread across the bottom drawer of Michael's office filing cabinet. Invisible unless someone looked closely. The next morning, the thread was broken. I stood frozen in the office, staring at that drawer for nearly a minute. Someone had opened it during the night, someone inside my house. I checked the front door immediately. Locked. No sign of forced entry, which meant whoever entered had a key. My mind fought against the conclusion, even while my heart already knew. Eric. I sat down slowly in Michael's chair, suddenly unable to breathe properly. Memories flooded me all at once. Eric at 8 years old, running into my arms after falling off his bicycle. Eric at 17, crying after his first heartbreak. Eric dancing with Vanessa at their wedding, while Michael whispered proudly, "We did good, Beth." Did we, had we? Or had we simply refused to see what our son was becoming? That afternoon, Vanessa called me. "You sound tired," she said immediately. "I didn't sleep much." Well, stress at your age can really affect memory and judgment. There it was again. Age, memory, judgment. The same carefully chosen words repeated over and over like they were building toward something. I stayed quiet. Vanessa continued softly. "Honestly, Beth, I worry about you being alone here." I noticed something then. She had stopped calling me mom. Now I was Beth. Cold, formal, detached. "I'm fine," I replied. There was a pause. Then Vanessa lowered her voice slightly. "You know Eric and I would never let anything happen to you." Something about the sentence chilled me. Not comforting. Warning. That weekend, my church friend Marilyn stopped by unexpectedly with banana bread. We sat on the porch drinking tea while autumn winds scattered leaves across the yard. Halfway through our conversation, she hesitated awkwardly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." Marilyn looked uncomfortable. "Vanessa mentioned you've been having some confusion lately." I stared at her. "What she said, you forget appointments sometimes, and that Eric's worried about your memory." For a moment, I genuinely couldn't speak. Marilyn rushed to continue. I told her grief affects everybody differently. "I'm not confused," I said sharply. She blinked at my tone. "I know that, honey." But did she? Or had the seed already been planted? After Marilyn left, I sat alone on the porch for over an hour, replaying every conversation I'd had with Eric and Vanessa during the past month. The comments about my age, the questions about finances, the pressure to move, the fake concern, and suddenly, the pattern became impossible to ignore. They were building a story where I was fragile, forgetful, unable to manage my own affairs. My chest tightened with panic. I went inside immediately and walked upstairs to the hallway closet where Michael kept important household documents. Most were untouched since his death, but one folder sat slightly crooked. I pulled it down carefully. Inside were copies of our insurance policies, tax records, property deeds, and a blank spot where the spare house key used to be. The key to my home. Gone. I gripped the edge of the shelf to steady myself. Then another memory surfaced. 2 weeks earlier, Eric had hugged me goodbye unusually tightly near this exact closet after helping me carry laundry upstairs. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now I understood. Tears burned my eyes, but anger was beginning to rise beneath the grief. Real anger. the kind that clears fog. That evening, Eric arrived smiling as if nothing had changed. "Hey, Mom." I studied his face carefully while he loosened his tie and walked into the kitchen like he still belonged there. Maybe part of him believed he did. Maybe that was what made betrayal hurt so much. Love gives people access to destroy you. "Everything okay?" he asked casually. I forced a smile. Of course. He opened the refrigerator without asking, grabbed a bottle of water, then glanced toward Michael's office. "You still haven't gone through all Dad's files?" "Not yet." "You probably should. There could be important things buried in there." "Important things." Again, he was fishing. Carefully. Patiently. I suddenly realized Michael must have seen this side of our son long before I did. That realization broke my heart more than anything else, because it meant my husband died carrying fear for me. As Eric prepared to leave that night, he hugged me again. But this time I noticed something cold and metallic pressing against his pocket. Keys. After he drove away, I locked every door in the house. Then I went upstairs, opened Michael's closet, and removed the small metal lockbox containing the Spain documents. For the first time since Michael died, I no longer felt merely lonely. I felt hunted, and deep down, I knew something even worse was coming. The first time Michael took me to Spain was in the summer of 1998. Eric had just graduated high school, and Michael's engineering firm sent him overseas for a 6-month infrastructure project near Valencia. At first, it was supposed to be temporary. But after 2 weeks there, Michael called me from a payphone, sounding happier than I'd heard him in years. "Beth," he said, laughing softly, "you need to see this place." I still remember stepping out of the taxi when I arrived. The air smelled like salt and oranges. Palm trees lined the narrow streets. Elderly couples sat outside cafes drinking wine at noon without guilt or hurry. Everything felt slower there, softer. Michael looked different too, lighter, like some invisible weight had slipped off his shoulders. One evening, we drove along the coast just before sunset. The Mediterranean looked gold beneath the fading light, and Michael pulled the car onto a narrow overlook above the water. Then he said something I never forgot. "When we're old, I want us to disappear here." I laughed at the time. Disappear from stress, from noise, from everybody needing something from us. Back then, I thought he was simply exhausted from work. Now I understand he meant much more than that. Over the next few years, Michael continued traveling to Spain occasionally for projects. And during one of those trips, he found the house. It wasn't grand, not even close. A small cream-colored home tucked along a quiet street outside Valencia. Blue shutters, tiny balcony, white stone walls warmed by sunlight. You could hear the ocean from the upstairs bedroom if the windows were open. The moment I saw it, I fell in love. We bought it quietly. No announcement, no family discussion. Michael insisted on that. At least for now, he told me. I remember teasing him once while we signed paperwork. "You act like we're joining the witness protection program." But Michael didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and stared out the lawyer's office window for several seconds before speaking. "Beth, promise me something. What don't tell Eric about this house?" I blinked in surprise. Why would we hide it from our son Michael? Rubbed his jaw slowly, clearly, choosing his words carefully. Because Eric doesn't know how to separate love from entitlement anymore. At the time, I thought he was being too harsh. Yes, Eric had always struggled with money. Even in college, he spent recklessly. Michael and I paid off 2 maxed out credit cards before he turned 25. Then there was the failed restaurant investment, the luxury SUV he couldn't afford, the expensive vacations Vanessa posted constantly online despite their endless financial complaints. But he was our son. Parents forgive things. That's what we do. We helped create this. I remember telling Michael once after Eric asked for another loan. Maybe we spoiled him too much. Michael looked tired when I said that. "No," he answered quietly. "We taught him love. The problem is that somewhere along the way, he started confusing love with access. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. Now those words haunt me. After retirement, Michael and I planned to spend part of every year in Spain. We even started learning basic Spanish together from CDs we played in the car. His accent was terrible. Absolutely terrible. And every time he mispronounced something, he'd wink at me and say, "Doesn't matter. You'll still know what I mean." God, I miss him. A few months before he died, Michael became quieter, more distracted. I noticed him studying financial statements late at night after he thought I'd gone to bed. Sometimes he locked his office door, which he had never done before in our entire marriage. One night, I woke around 2 in the morning and found him sitting alone in the kitchen. No lights on except the stove hood, just staring into darkness. Michael. He looked startled, then immediately smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah? You sure?" He hesitated. Then he reached for my hand. "If something ever happens to me, promise you'll protect yourself." Fear prickled down my spine. "Why are you talking like that?" "Just promise me." I laughed nervously. "You're scaring me." His eyes softened, then full of sadness I didn't understand at the time. "Beth, some people change when money gets involved." I remember squeezing his hand. "Eric would never hurt us." Michael looked down at the table and said nothing. That silence means something very different to me now. After his death, I couldn't bring myself to touch the Spain documents for weeks. They remained hidden inside the metal lockbox beneath old photo albums in the closet. Until the night I realized Eric had been inside my home, searching through Michael's office. That night, after locking every door, I carried the lockbox downstairs to the dining room table. My hands trembled as I entered the code. Inside sat the original deed to the house, Spanish bank paperwork, 2 old photographs from Valencia, and an envelope. Cream-colored, sealed. My breath caught immediately. I recognized Michael's handwriting. For Beth only. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Then I noticed something written smaller beneath my name. "Open only if Eric turns against you." The room suddenly felt cold. I sat there frozen, hearing nothing except the ticking clock on the wall. Michael knew. Somehow before he died, he knew. Tears filled my eyes so quickly I could barely see. I pressed the envelope against my chest and broke down sobbing right there at the dining room table. Not only because I missed my husband, but because I realized how frightened he must have been near the end. Frightened for me. Eventually, I wiped my face and carefully opened the letter. But before I could unfold the pages inside, headlights swept across my front window. A car door slammed outside. I quickly shoved the documents back into the box just as someone knocked on the front door. 3 sharp knocks. My pulse exploded. At nearly 10 o'clock at night, there was only one person it could be. Mom Eric called through the door. "You awake?" I closed the lockbox immediately and slid it beneath the table. Then I stood there silently for one terrible second before answering. "Yes." "You didn't answer your phone." I hadn't even heard it ring. Another knock. Softer this time. "Can I come in?" Something deep inside me screamed no, but I opened the door anyway. Eric smiled the moment he saw me, though his eyes moved quickly past my shoulder into the house behind me. Searching. Always searching. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine. You seem upset." I was trying to sleep. He stepped inside before I invited him. That was when I noticed it. His gaze drifting immediately toward the hallway leading to Michael's office. And in that exact moment, standing there barefoot in my own home, I finally accepted the truth I had been resisting for weeks. My son wasn't grieving with me anymore. He was hunting for something. And whatever he believed Michael left behind, he was becoming desperate enough to destroy me to find it. The night Eric showed up unexpectedly, I barely slept afterward. I lay awake listening to every sound in the house. The refrigerator humming downstairs, branches scraping against the windows, floorboards settling softly in the dark. And beneath all of it, one terrible thought repeating over and over in my mind: Michael was right. For weeks I had fought against believing that my own son could truly manipulate me, even after the copied key, even after the questions about overseas property, even after Vanessa quietly spreading rumors about my memory. Part of me still wanted an innocent explanation. But that night changed something inside me. Because when Eric stepped into my house, he didn't look at me first. He looked past me, toward Michael's office, toward the files, toward the possibility of money. The next morning, I made coffee with trembling hands and stood at the kitchen sink, watching gray November rain slide down the windows. My reflection looked older somehow, not because of grief, because of fear. At 10 o'clock, Vanessa called. Her voice sounded sugary sweet. "How are you feeling today, Beth?" "Not Mom." "Never Mom anymore." "I'm all right. Eric said you seemed upset last night. He came over late. Well, he worries about you." She paused. "We both do." I said nothing. Then she added gently, "You know, stress can affect cognition at your age." There it was again. Cognition, memory, confusion, always the same language, carefully chosen, like they were rehearsing for something official. After hanging up, I walked into the living room and stared at a framed family photo from Christmas 5 years earlier. Michael sat beside me, smiling warmly, while Eric and Vanessa stood behind us near the fireplace. Looking at it now felt surreal, like staring at strangers wearing my family's faces. Around noon, Eric arrived carrying grocery bags. "I picked up a few things for you," he said casually. I thanked him quietly and began putting items away while he wandered through the kitchen. Then he leaned against the counter and sighed dramatically. "Mom, we need to start making some practical decisions." I froze slightly. "What kind of decisions?" "This house." My chest tightened immediately. "It's too much for you. I already told you I'm staying here." "For now," he replied. "But long term?" "It doesn't make sense." I shut the refrigerator door harder than I intended. "This was your father's home, and Dad would want you safe." The manipulation in that sentence was so obvious, it almost stunned me. Using Michael against me. I turned slowly toward him. Safe from what exactly? Eric hesitated. Then he gave me that patient look people use with children or difficult elderly relatives. "Mom, nobody's saying you can't take care of yourself." But he exhaled heavily. "You've been forgetting things." "No, I haven't. You left the stove on last week because Vanessa distracted me while I was cooking. You missed your dentist appointment. It was rescheduled." Eric rubbed his forehead again like I was exhausting him. "You're proving my point." I stared at my son in disbelief. The same boy who once cried because he accidentally stepped on a bird in our driveway. The same boy who used to leave me handwritten Mother's Day notes under my pillow. Now standing in my kitchen, building a case against me. A cold numbness spread through my chest. Then Eric reached into his briefcase and pulled out documents. My heart dropped instantly. "What's that? Nothing dramatic," he said quickly. "Just paperwork so I can help manage things if needed." I didn't touch the papers. Power of attorney. The words practically screamed at me from the top page. "I don't need this. Everybody needs one eventually. I'm not incapable. Nobody said you were." But his eyes said otherwise. I pushed the documents back toward him. "No." The atmosphere changed immediately. Subtly, but unmistakably. Eric's jaw tightened. "Mom, stop being stubborn." I said, "No, you're acting emotionally." "Because my husband died 3 months ago." His expression hardened for one quick second before softening again. "Too fast. Like a mask slipping." "We're trying to protect you," he said quietly. Something inside me finally snapped then. "Protect me?" I repeated softly. "Or control me?" The silence afterward felt dangerous. Eric stared at me across the kitchen island. And for the first time in my life, I saw resentment in my son's eyes. Not frustration, not concern. Resentment. Like I was standing between him and something he believed belonged to him. Eventually, he collected the papers slowly. "You know, Vanessa and I have sacrificed a lot helping you." Sacrificed. The word almost made me laugh. "You wanted to help?" I replied. "We're family." Family. That word used to mean safety to me. Now it felt like a weapon. Before leaving, Eric paused at the doorway. Then he looked back casually and asked, "Did Dad ever keep another safe deposit box somewhere?" Every muscle in my body tightened. No. He studied my face carefully, too carefully, then nodded slowly. Okay. After he left, I locked the front door and leaned against it, shaking. Not because of the paperwork, because of the question. He was still searching, still convinced Michael hid something valuable, and deep down, I think he already suspected I was lying. That evening, I drove to the grocery store just to escape the house for a while. But halfway through shopping, I ran into one of my neighbors, Carol Jenkins. She smiled awkwardly when she saw me. "Beth, honey, how are you doing?" "I'm all right." Carol hesitated, then lowered her voice sympathetically. "Getting older is hard. My mother went through memory problems too." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" She looked embarrassed instantly. "Oh, Vanessa mentioned you've been struggling lately." My stomach dropped. Struggling. That was the word now. Not grieving, not healing, struggling. I forced a tight smile and finished shopping quickly before I completely lost composure in the middle of the store. When I got home, I sat in the car for nearly 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel. They were poisoning people against me, quietly, patiently, one conversation at a time. By the end of the week, the pressure became worse. Vanessa started sending listings for senior living communities to my email. Eric called constantly, asking whether I had reviewed the paperwork. Then one afternoon, I came home from church and noticed a realtor business card sitting on my kitchen counter. My blood ran cold. I picked it up immediately. Handwritten on the back were the words, "Great property potential. Call anytime." I didn't remember putting it there, which meant someone else had. My breathing became shallow. I walked room to room through the house, checking windows and doors until I reached Michael's office. One drawer sat slightly open. Inside files had clearly been moved. I closed my eyes. They had entered my home again. And suddenly, another horrifying realization hit me. If Eric and Vanessa were already willing to lie about my mental state, already willing to enter my house secretly, already willing to pressure me into signing control over my life, then how far would they go if they discovered Spain? That night, for the first time since Michael died, I took the lockbox out of the closet and carried it downstairs. Then I packed a small suitcase. Not because I planned to leave yet, but because somewhere deep inside me, instinct was screaming the same warning over and over: prepare now, before it's too late. 3 days after I packed the suitcase, Eric called and said he wanted to stop by with someone important. The way he said it immediately put me on edge. "Who?" I asked carefully. "A doctor friend," he replied too quickly. "Nothing serious. Vanessa and I just thought it might help to check in on how you're doing emotionally." Emotionally. That word again. Everything was becoming part of a narrative now. I almost refused. In fact, I should have refused. But something stopped me. Maybe instinct, maybe survival, because by then I had begun to understand something very important. People reveal themselves most clearly when they think you're powerless. So instead of arguing, I softened my voice. "That's thoughtful of you." Eric sounded relieved immediately. "We'll come by tomorrow afternoon." The moment I hung up, I called Diane Whitmore. Michael's attorney answered on the second ring. Beth, hearing her calm voice, nearly made me cry. I told her everything: the copied key, the power of attorney papers, the rumors about my memory, the realtor card, and now the sudden doctor visit. Diane went silent for several seconds. Then she spoke very carefully. "Beth, I need you to listen closely." Fear spread through my chest. They may be trying to establish diminished capacity. I gripped the phone tighter. What does that mean exactly? It means they create a documented pattern suggesting you can no longer manage your affairs independently. My stomach turned. "You think my own son would do that?" Diane hesitated just slightly. "Yes." The simplicity of her answer hurt more than anything else. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. What do I do? Do not sign anything, Diane said firmly, and document every interaction from now on. That was when I remembered the small digital recorder Michael once bought me years earlier for school meetings back when I taught third grade. I found it in a drawer upstairs that night, and for the first time in my life, I prepared to secretly record my own child. The next afternoon, I cleaned the house carefully before Eric and Vanessa arrived. Not because I cared what they thought anymore, because I suddenly understood appearances mattered. Every detail mattered. I wore makeup for the first time in weeks. I styled my hair neatly. I even placed fresh flowers on the dining room table. Evidence of competence. Evidence of normalcy. At exactly 2 o'clock, Eric arrived with Vanessa and a man in his 50s carrying a leather briefcase. "Mom, this is Dr. Alan Mercer," Eric said brightly. The man smiled warmly and extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hayes." Something about him immediately felt rehearsed, polished, professional in a way that lacked genuine warmth. I shook his hand politely, while the recorder hidden in my cardigan pocket quietly captured every word. Vanessa moved around my kitchen, acting overly concerned. "We just thought this might reassure everybody," she said gently. Everybody. Interesting choice of word. I invited them to sit in the living room. Dr. Mercer asked casual questions at first. How had I been sleeping? Was I eating regularly? Did I ever feel confused or disoriented? I answered carefully, truthfully, but slowly, purposefully. Then he began asking stranger questions. "What day is it today, Tuesday? And who's the current president?" I blinked at him. "Seriously." Eric shifted awkwardly in his seat. Vanessa quickly jumped in. She's had a few forgetful moments lately. I turned toward her calmly. "Like what?" Vanessa smiled sympathetically. "Oh, little things. Misplacing items. Repeating stories. That happens to everybody. Yes, but grief can accelerate cognitive decline in older adults." There it was again. Cognitive decline. The phrase sounded practiced. Dr. Mercer nodded thoughtfully and scribbled something in his notebook. My pulse quickened. This wasn't concern. This was documentation. Suddenly, I understood exactly why Diane had sounded alarmed. They were building evidence, not medical evidence, performative evidence, the kind that could sound convincing in court if repeated enough times. Dr. Mercer continued asking questions. Then came the one that changed everything. "Mrs. Hayes," he asked gently, "have you ever become confused about your financial responsibilities?" Before I could answer, Vanessa spoke first. She gets overwhelmed very easily now. I looked directly at her. "Vanessa, I can answer for myself." A flash of irritation crossed her face before disappearing instantly. "Of course," she said sweetly. I realized then how dangerous she truly was. Not loud, not explosive, controlled, calculated. The kind of person who destroys reputations quietly while smiling. I answered Dr. Mercer carefully. "My husband handled most finances during our marriage, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my affairs." Dr. Mercer nodded slowly, though his expression revealed nothing. Then Eric leaned forward. "Mom, nobody's attacking you." I stared at him. Attacking. Interesting word, because nobody had used it except him. Guilty people often reveal themselves accidentally. "I didn't say you were attacking me," I replied softly. The room went still. For one brief second, Eric looked uncomfortable. Then Vanessa immediately redirected the conversation. "We just love you, Beth." Again? Beth. Not mom, not family, just Beth. Like they were already emotionally separating themselves from me in preparation for something legal. The interview continued another 20 minutes. Eventually, I decided to test them. I lowered my eyes slightly and spoke more hesitantly. "I've just been so tired lately," I murmured. Eric exchanged a quick glance with Vanessa. Encouragement flashed across both their faces so quickly, it made my stomach turn. They wanted weakness. So I gave them a little. "I forget things sometimes," I admitted quietly. Vanessa leaned closer immediately. See, that's exactly why we're worried. Dr. Mercer scribbled another note. I forced my hands not to shake. Then I added softly, some days I don't know what I'd do without Eric helping me. The relief on my son's face was instant, and in that exact moment, I knew. This wasn't about protecting me. This was about control, about positioning himself as caretaker, about creating dependency. The interview finally ended around 3:30. As Eric walked Dr. Mercer toward the front door, Vanessa stayed behind with me in the living room. Her voice dropped lower once the men stepped outside. You know, she said gently, fighting help only makes things harder. I looked at her carefully. What things? She smiled. Transitions. A chill ran through me. Then she touched my arm softly. You should start trusting people to make decisions for you. People. Plural again, not family. People. I suddenly saw the entire future they envisioned for me. A quiet transfer of power. My home sold, my finances controlled, my independence slowly erased, while everyone around me called it care. And worst of all, they expected me to cooperate. When they finally left, I locked the door immediately and pulled the recorder from my pocket with shaking hands. Then I replayed the conversation. Every accusation, every leading question, every carefully planted suggestion about confusion and decline. By the end, I felt physically sick. But then I heard something else. Right before Dr. Mercer exited the front porch, his voice lowered almost to a whisper. Still audible, still recorded. This could work in court. Silence followed. Then Eric quietly replied, that's what we're hoping. I stopped breathing. The recorder nearly slipped from my hand. My own son, not worried, not grieving, planning. That night, I sat alone in Michael's office, staring at the lockbox from Spain. And for the first time since all of this began, I became truly afraid of Eric Hayes. The morning after I listened to the recording, I drove to Diane Whitmore's office before sunrise. I barely remember the drive. My hands shook on the steering wheel the entire way there. Every red light felt endless. Every passing car made me paranoid that somehow Eric already knew I had evidence against him. Because once you realize someone is willing to manipulate you, your mind starts questioning everything. Every smile, every hug, every kind word. Diane's office sat inside an old brick building downtown near the courthouse. Michael and I had worked with her for over 20 years. She handled our will's property records, retirement paperwork, every important legal decision of our adult lives. When I walked into her office carrying the recorder in my purse, Diane stood immediately. One look at my face, and she said quietly, "It got worse." I nodded. Then I started crying before I could stop myself. Not graceful tears, not quiet tears. The kind that come from exhaustion more than sadness. Diane closed the office door and let me cry for almost a minute before handing me tissues. Then I played the recording. She listened without interrupting. But when Dr. Mercer whispered, "This could work in court," Diane's jaw tightened visibly. And when Eric answered, "That's what we're hoping," her entire expression changed. Cold, professional, certain. When the recording ended, silence filled the office. Finally, Diane leaned back slowly. "Beth, your son is preparing to challenge your competency." Even though I already knew hearing the words spoken out loud made me feel physically ill. I stared down at my hands. Why would he do this? Diane hesitated carefully before answering. Because desperate people justify terrible things. That word again. Desperate. I looked up sharply. You know something. She studied me for a long moment. Then she opened a drawer and removed a thick manila folder. Michael asked me not to share this unless it became necessary. Fear crawled up my spine immediately. The folder landed softly on the desk between us. About 6 months before he died, Diane said quietly, Michael hired a private investigator named Scott Brennan. My heart stopped. What he became concerned about Eric's finances. I couldn't speak. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. Diane opened the folder slowly. Inside were pages of bank records, printed emails, photographs, and investigation notes. evidence. So much evidence. Michael discovered Eric had accumulated significant debt. How significant? Diane looked down at the paperwork. Over $400,000. I genuinely thought I misheard her. 400 what credit cards? Personal loans, gambling losses, business debt. My stomach twisted violently. No, Eric doesn't gamble. Diane's eyes softened with pity. Yes, he does. I leaned back in my chair like I'd been struck. Images flooded my mind all at once. Eric constantly needing temporary help. Vanessa obsessing over appearances. The expensive vacations. The panic hidden underneath their smiles. Oh my God. Michael knew. All this time, Michael knew. I pressed trembling fingers against my mouth. Why didn't he tell me? Because he was trying to protect you. That answer shattered something inside me. Diane continued carefully. Michael believed Eric was spiraling financially, but he hoped it could still be fixed quietly. He didn't want to destroy your relationship with your son unless absolutely necessary. Tears burned my eyes again. That sounded exactly like Michael, always carrying burdens alone, always protecting everybody else. Diane handed me one of the reports. Eric also attempted to secure loans using your home as implied collateral. I blinked in confusion. What does that mean? It means he suggested family property backing without legal authorization. I stared at her. You mean he used our name? Yes. My chest tightened painfully. He forged signatures. Not directly, Diane answered carefully. But there were indications he attempted to imitate Michael's authorization on preliminary documents. For several seconds, I could barely breathe. This wasn't irresponsibility anymore. This was fraud, criminal behavior. And suddenly Michael's fear made horrifying sense. He thought Eric might come after the Spain property, I whispered. Diane nodded slowly. That's one reason Michael insisted the Valencia house remain confidential. I closed my eyes. Memories surfaced one after another. Michael sitting alone in the dark kitchen. Michael locking his office door. Michael asking me to promise I'd protect myself. The signs had been there. I simply refused to see them because mothers don't want to imagine danger coming from their own children. Diane reached for another document. There's more. I looked up weakly. Eric contacted my office 2 weeks ago. Ice flooded my veins. What he claimed you were struggling emotionally and said he might need to assist with financial matters temporarily. I stared at her in disbelief. He came to you? Yes. What exactly did he ask? Diane opened another note. He specifically asked whether Michael had undisclosed international assets. My blood ran cold. Spain. He suspected it. Maybe not fully. Maybe not with proof. But enough to keep digging. What did you tell him that I couldn't discuss confidential matters? I exhaled shakily. Then Diane added something even worse. He also asked whether Michael ever updated the will privately before his death. I stared at her silently. My son truly believed there was hidden money somewhere, and he was becoming more reckless trying to find it. Diane folded her hands together carefully. Beth, there's another issue you need to understand. I braced myself. Eric's debt situation appears urgent. How urgent? There are indications he's behind on multiple payments. Then she slid a photograph across the desk. A grainy image of Eric outside a downtown bar speaking to a large man in a dark coat. Who is that Nathan Cole? The name meant nothing to me. He's known for collecting gambling debts. A chill spread through my entire body. Suddenly, every piece connected. The pressure, the panic, the obsession with assets. Eric wasn't simply greedy. He was cornered. And cornered people can become dangerous. I whispered the question before I could stop myself. Do you think he'd hurt me? Diane didn't answer immediately, which terrified me more than if she had. Finally, she spoke very carefully. I think Eric has convinced himself that controlling your finances is justified. I stared at the floor. That was lawyer language. Careful language. But underneath it, I heard the truth clearly. Yes, he might. Diane leaned forward slightly. You need to stop underestimating what's happening. The words stung because they were true. For weeks, I kept hoping this would somehow return to normal, that Eric would suddenly remember who he used to be, that grief and stress had temporarily changed him. But sitting there surrounded by evidence, I finally accepted reality. This wasn't temporary. This was who my son had become. Then Diane said something that changed everything. Michael left specific instructions if things escalated. I looked up sharply. What instructions? She opened another sealed file. If Eric attempted legal control over you, Michael wanted you to go to Spain immediately. My pulse quickened. What? The Valencia property was placed under protections Eric cannot easily trace or access. I stared at her in shock. Michael planned this. Not casually. Carefully. Methodically. As if he anticipated this exact nightmare. Tears slid silently down my face. Oh, Michael. Diane's voice softened. He loved you very much, Beth. That broke me completely. Because suddenly I understood the terrible burden my husband carried before he died. He wasn't afraid of losing money. He was afraid of losing me. After nearly an hour, Diane walked me to my car personally. Before I left, she held my arm gently. You need to be careful now. I know. No, she said firmly. I mean truly careful. Eric is escalating. I nodded weakly. Then she added one final sentence that stayed with me the entire drive home. Desperate people become unpredictable when they realize time is running out. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized time might be running out for me too. 3 days after my meeting with Diane, Eric invited me to a small family dinner. The moment he asked, I knew it wasn't really dinner. It was strategy. Still, I agreed to go. Because by then, I had stopped reacting emotionally in front of them. That was the only advantage I had left. The dinner took place at Eric and Vanessa's house in a wealthy suburb outside Columbus. The kind of neighborhood where every lawn looked professionally measured and every porch displayed seasonal decorations that changed with military precision. Michael used to joke that the entire street looked like a catalog. That night, Christmas lights already glowed along the rooftops, even though Thanksgiving hadn't arrived yet. I sat in my car outside their home for a full minute before going in. Part of me wanted to drive away, but another part needed to see how far they were willing to go. Vanessa opened the door wearing a cream sweater and a smile so warm it almost looked believable. Beth. You made it. Again? Beth? Not Mom. Never Mom anymore. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and cinnamon candles. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers. Everything looked staged. Too perfect. Inside, several relatives had already arrived. Eric's cousin Amanda, his uncle Robert, Vanessa's sister Michelle and her husband. Even Carol Jenkins from church somehow ended up there after randomly stopping by. The moment I walked in, I understood. This wasn't dinner. It was an audience. Everyone's been worried about you, Vanessa said loudly enough for the room to hear. I forced a tight smile. I'm doing all right. Amanda hugged me gently. We've all been praying for you, Aunt Beth. The sympathy in her eyes almost broke my heart because she genuinely believed I needed help. Eric appeared from the kitchen carrying wine glasses. There's my mom. He kissed my cheek while holding my shoulders a little too tightly. Performing affection. I noticed it immediately now. Once you see manipulation clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee. Dinner began pleasantly enough. People talked about football holiday shopping and winter weather. Vanessa floated around the dining room, refilling drinks and laughing softly at everyone's jokes. But beneath the surface, tension coiled tighter and tighter inside me. Because I knew something was coming. About halfway through dinner, Uncle Robert asked politely, "So Beth, have you thought about what you'll do with the house long term?" There it was, the setup. I glanced briefly toward Eric. He lowered his eyes to his plate. Coward. I'm staying there, I answered calmly. Vanessa smiled sympathetically. For now, of course. I set down my fork carefully. What does that mean? Oh, nothing bad, she replied quickly. We just worry about you being alone. Michelle nodded dramatically. Honestly, my friend's mother stayed in her house too long after her husband died. It became dangerous. Dangerous. Interesting word choice. Eric finally spoke. We're just trying to think ahead. Amanda looked uncertain. Beth seems fine to me. Vanessa gave a soft little laugh. She has good days. The room went quiet. Very quiet. I stared at her. What exactly does that mean? Vanessa immediately softened her expression as if I were becoming emotional. Beth, nobody's attacking you. Again with that word. Attacking. I suddenly realized they'd rehearsed this together. The language, the tone, the concern. Everything carefully designed to make me appear unstable if I reacted emotionally. Eric sighed heavily beside me. Mom, please don't make this uncomfortable. Something icy moved through my chest. Not because of the manipulation anymore, because of how calm they were while doing it. This wasn't impulsive cruelty. It was organized. Uncle Robert cleared his throat awkwardly. Maybe everybody should relax, but Vanessa interrupted gently. We just love her. That's all this is. Then she reached across the table and touched my hand. And I swear to God, I nearly pulled away like her fingers burned. She forgets things sometimes. Vanessa continued softly to the others. Eric's just been under a lot of pressure trying to help. Pressure. Now they were turning him into the victim. I looked around the table slowly. Some people looked uncomfortable. Some looked sympathetic toward Eric. And worst of all, some already believed them. Carol gave me a sad smile from across the room. That smile crushed something inside me, because I suddenly understood how easily older women disappear socially once people start questioning our minds. You stop becoming a person. You become a concern. Eric leaned forward. We found a really nice senior living community nearby. There it was. Finally. Direct. Amanda blinked. Wait, you're moving, Aunt Beth? No, I answered immediately. Vanessa jumped in quickly. She's resistant right now. Resistant. Not unwilling. Not independent. Resistant. Every word intentionally chosen to sound medical. Reasonable. Temporary. Like I was a patient refusing treatment instead of a grown woman protecting her own life. I felt anger rising dangerously in my chest. Real anger. The kind that wants to expose everything immediately. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everyone about the recordings, the copied key, the fake doctor, the lies, but then something stopped me. Michael. I suddenly remembered his face the night he asked me to protect myself. Not defend myself emotionally. Protect myself strategically. That realization changed everything. Because if I exploded right now, they would win. They wanted emotional reactions, confusion, instability. Instead, I forced myself to breathe slowly. Then I lowered my eyes slightly and spoke softly. I know you're all worried. Eric visibly relaxed. Vanessa, too. They thought I was surrendering. Good. Maybe I continued quietly. I have been overwhelmed lately. Vanessa squeezed my hand immediately. There's nothing wrong with accepting help. I almost admired her performance. Almost. Eric leaned back in his chair for the first time all evening. The tension in his face eased, because he thought the pressure was finally working. Then Uncle Robert asked gently, have you considered signing temporary assistance paperwork? Paperwork. There it was. This entire dinner had one purpose: public pressure, witnesses, community reinforcement. I looked around the table again, everyone waiting, watching, judging my response. And suddenly I made a decision that changed the course of everything afterward. I smiled weakly. Then I said, maybe I should think about it. Relief flooded Eric's face so intensely it shocked me. Vanessa nearly looked triumphant. Michelle smiled approvingly. Carol reached over and touched my shoulder sympathetically. The entire room softened instantly, because they believed I was finally giving in. And in that exact moment, I realized something important. People reveal the truth when they think they've won. The rest of dinner passed easily after that. Too easily. Eric poured himself another drink and laughed more openly than he had in weeks. Vanessa stopped carefully monitoring every word. Even their posture changed. Confidence replaced caution. That alone told me I'd made the right choice. When dinner ended, Eric walked me to my car. Cold winds swept across the driveway, while Christmas lights flickered softly overhead. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I've just been thinking." "That's good." His voice sounded relieved. Then he lowered his tone slightly. "We're trying to do what's best for you, Mom." For the first time all evening, he called me Mom again. Not because he loved me in that moment, because he thought compliance had restored my usefulness. I looked at him carefully beneath the porch light. This man had my son's face, but I no longer knew who he really was underneath it. "I know," I said quietly, and I let him believe the lie. As I drove home through the dark Ohio streets, my pulse slowly steadied, because while Eric and Vanessa celebrated what they thought was progress, I had already made my real decision. I was leaving. Not forever, not yet, but long enough to uncover everything Michael had hidden in Spain. And when I finally returned, I would never be powerless again. I told Eric I needed a few days alone after the family dinner. To my surprise, he agreed immediately. That should have comforted me. Instead, it terrified me. Because people only stop pushing when they believe resistance is weakening. And Eric believed exactly that. For 2 days, I pretended to become quieter, slower, more uncertain. I answered his calls softly. I let Vanessa explain things to me twice, as if I were struggling to follow conversations. I even deliberately forgot where I placed my reading glasses while Vanessa watched. Every performance disgusted me. But Diane had been right. I needed them overconfident. On the third morning before sunrise, Diane picked me up in a black sedan 2 streets away from my house. I carried only one suitcase and Michael's lockbox. The cold November air bit through my coat as I climbed into the passenger seat. Diane looked at me carefully. "You all right?" "No," I answered honestly. She nodded slightly. "Good. That means you understand how serious this is." We drove in silence for several minutes before she finally spoke again. "Eric called my office yesterday." Fear shot through me immediately. "What did he want?" "He said he's concerned you may be emotionally unstable." I stared out the window. "Of course he did." "He's escalating faster than I expected," Diane continued, "which means his financial situation is probably worsening." I tightened my grip on the lockbox, then quietly asked the question I had avoided for days. "What if he finds out I'm gone?" "He will." The certainty in her voice chilled me. "But by then you'll already be in Spain." At the airport, Diane helped me through security personally. I noticed her scanning the crowd constantly, like she expected someone to appear at any moment. Paranoia had become contagious between us. Before boarding, she handed me a thick envelope. "What's this?" "Documents you may need once you reach Valencia." I nodded quietly. Then Diane touched my arm gently. "Beth, whatever you find there, remember, this isn't your fault." I nearly broke down crying right there beside gate C-17. Not because of fear, because kindness suddenly felt so rare. The flight lasted nearly 9 hours. I didn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, memories surfaced. Eric at age 10, learning how to ride a bike, while Michael ran beside him laughing. Eric at 23, dancing with Vanessa at their wedding. Eric helping me carry groceries after Michael's funeral. And then another image replacing all the others, Eric whispering outside my front door. That's what we're hoping. By the time the plane landed in Valencia, emotional exhaustion sat inside my chest like wet concrete. The Mediterranean air hit me the moment I stepped outside the airport. Warm, salted, soft. Even in November, Spain felt gentler than Ohio. For one painful second, I almost expected Michael to appear beside me, carrying our luggage and joking about my overpacking. Instead, I stood alone, a widow hiding from her own son. The taxi ride to the house took nearly 40 minutes. As the city faded behind us, familiar memories returned slowly. The narrow roads, the white stone buildings, orange groves stretching across the hillsides. I pressed trembling fingers against the window as we turned onto the quiet coastal street where Michael and I once dreamed of growing old together. And then I saw it. The house. Exactly as I remembered. Cream-colored walls glowing softly beneath afternoon sunlight. Blue shutters. Tiny balcony. The sight of it shattered me completely. By the time I unlocked the front door, tears blurred my vision so badly I could barely see. The house smelled closed up and dusty, but underneath it lingered traces of sea air and old wood polish. Home. Not my American home. Something stranger. More sacred. Michael's final protection. I walked slowly through each room, touching furniture covered with white sheets. The small kitchen where we once drank wine after midnight. The narrow staircase Michael always complained about. The upstairs bedroom overlooking the sea. Everything still existed exactly where we left it years earlier. Like time had been waiting for us to return, but we never would. At sunset, I sat alone on the balcony, wrapped in one of Michael's old sweaters, listening to waves crash softly in the distance. That was when I finally opened the rest of the envelope Diane had given me. Inside were copies of investigative notes from Scott Brennan. Detailed. Disturbingly detailed. I read for over 2 hours. And with every page, my understanding of Eric became darker. There were casino records, loan defaults, private debts, photographs of Eric meeting men outside bars and hotels. One report described Eric losing nearly $80,000 over a single weekend in Chicago. I covered my mouth in horror. My son, my little boy. How had he fallen this far? Then I found something even worse. A copy of a bank inquiry. Eric had attempted to access one of Michael's retirement accounts less than 3 weeks before Michael died. I reread the document 3 times because my brain refused to process it. No, no, that couldn't be right. Michael was still alive then, weak from stress and health problems, but alive. Why would Eric try accessing accounts before his father even died? My pulse pounded painfully. Then another realization hit me. Michael must have discovered this. That's why he became so frightened near the end. Not because of debt alone, because Eric's desperation was accelerating. I barely slept that night. The next morning, sunlight poured through the upstairs windows while I made coffee in the tiny kitchen. For a few peaceful minutes, the ocean breeze almost calmed me. Then I noticed something strange. A loose floorboard beneath the staircase. I froze immediately. Michael was obsessive about home repairs. He never left things unfinished. Kneeling slowly, I pressed against the board until it shifted upward slightly. Hidden beneath it sat a small metal box. My breath caught. Inside were more documents and a second envelope. This one addressed directly in Michael's handwriting, "For Beth, if things become dangerous." My hands trembled violently as I opened it. Inside was a letter, and beneath the letter, a flash drive. I unfolded the pages carefully. Beth, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry. First, I need you to understand something clearly. None of this is your fault. I tried for years to help Eric quietly. More than you know. I paid debts he promised never existed. I covered losses he swore were temporary. I believed every apology because I wanted to believe our son was still reachable. But something changed in him, and the more money disappeared, the colder he became. I stopped breathing. Tears slid silently down my face as I continued reading. There is evidence on the drive Scott collected before I shut the investigation down. I couldn't bear learning more while I was still alive. But if Eric has turned against you, then you need the truth completely. Protect yourself first, not Eric. You have spent your entire life saving everyone around you, Beth. Please don't destroy yourself trying to save someone who no longer wants to be saved. Love, always, Michael. By the time I reached the bottom of the page, I was sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. Because even now, even after death, my husband was still trying to protect me. And deep inside, I already knew the truth waiting on that flash drive was going to destroy whatever remained of the son I thought I knew. I stared at the flash drive for almost an hour before I finally opened Michael's old laptop, the same silver laptop he used during our trips to Spain years ago. His fingerprints were probably still on the keyboard. That thought nearly stopped me from turning it on. Outside waves rolled gently against the shore beneath a pale gray morning sky. Somewhere down the street, church bells rang softly across Valencia. The world felt peaceful. Too peaceful for what I was about to uncover. My hands trembled as I inserted the flash drive. Several folders appeared instantly: financial records, surveillance photos, recorded calls, private notes, and one folder simply labeled "For Beth." My chest tightened painfully. I opened that folder first. Inside sat a video file. I hesitated only a second before pressing play. Michael appeared on the screen immediately, alive, breathing, smiling sadly into the camera. The sight of him hit me so hard I physically gasped. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I just stared at my husband's face, while tears streamed silently down mine. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, dark circles beneath his eyes, but his voice remained gentle. "Hey, sweetheart." I covered my mouth instantly. God, I missed him. "If you're watching this," Michael continued quietly, "then things got worse than I hoped they would." His expression darkened slightly. I wanted to believe Eric would stop before he crossed certain lines. I kept thinking maybe he was just overwhelmed financially, maybe ashamed, maybe scared. Michael looked down briefly before continuing. But fear changes people, especially people who believe they're running out of time. I listened without breathing. The first time I suspected something was truly wrong was 2 years ago. Michael leaned back slowly in his chair. "Eric asked me for $80,000. I closed my eyes. Another debt? Another crisis I never knew about. When I refused, Michael said quietly, he became angry in a way I'd never seen before. Not emotional. Cold. That word again. Cold. The same word I would later use myself. Michael continued speaking carefully, like each sentence cost him something. A few weeks later, my accountant flagged unusual activity connected to one of our retirement accounts. My pulse quickened. He discovered someone had attempted preliminary access using personal verification details only family members would know. I stopped breathing entirely. "Eric." Michael sighed heavily. I confronted him privately. The room around me seemed to disappear. He denied everything at first. Then he cried, said he was desperate, said Vanessa didn't know how bad things had become. I pressed trembling fingers against my lips. Even now, part of me wanted to defend my son, wanted to explain, wanted to believe. But Michael's eyes held only exhausted sadness. "I paid the debt," he said softly. Again, again. The words shattered me. How many times had Michael protected our son while hiding the truth from me? Michael looked directly into the camera then, and that was my mistake. Tears blurred my vision completely. "Because saving someone repeatedly doesn't always save them," he whispered. "Sometimes it teaches them there will always be another rescue." I broke down crying all over again. Not because he was wrong, because he was right. Every excuse I made for Eric throughout his life suddenly replayed in my head. He's young, he's stressed. He made a mistake. He just needs help getting back on his feet. Mothers become experts at rewriting danger into vulnerability. Michael paused for several seconds before continuing. "Beth, if Eric has turned against you, you need to understand something very clearly." His voice hardened slightly for the first time. "This is no longer about money alone." A chill spread through me. He became obsessed with inheritance after his debt problems worsened, especially after I refused additional payments. Michael rubbed his forehead tiredly. He started asking strange questions about assets, insurance policies, overseas accounts, Spain. He suspected it even then. I never confirmed anything Michael said, but I realized something important. His eyes lifted toward the camera again. Eric no longer saw boundaries the same way decent people do. The sentence echoed through me like ice water. Then Michael said the thing that truly destroyed me. I think my illness frightened him financially more than emotionally. I let out a broken sob, because deep down, I had already started suspecting the same thing. Michael's expression softened again. I know that's painful to hear. God knows it's painful to say. He smiled sadly then. But you need truth now, not comfort. I sat motionless while tears rolled down my face. Outside sunlight flickered softly across the balcony curtains. Such a beautiful morning. Such an ugly truth. Then Michael reached toward something off camera and held up a folder. Scott Brennan collected evidence I couldn't emotionally handle reviewing myself. My stomach tightened immediately. If you've reached this point, then you need to see everything. He lowered the folder slowly. And Beth? If Eric tries to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself, Michael's voice cracked slightly. Don't let him. That almost destroyed me completely. Because my husband knew me so well. He knew guilt would be the weapon used against me. Michael gave one final exhausted smile. I loved our son very much. Tears streamed harder down my face. But loving someone doesn't mean surrendering your life to their destruction. Then he looked directly into the camera one last time. And I loved you enough to make sure you had somewhere safe to run. The video ended. I sat there staring at the blank screen for a long time afterward. The silence inside the little Spanish house felt unbearable. Not because Michael was gone, because I finally understood how alone he must have felt carrying all of this before he died. Eventually, I forced myself to open the remaining files. What I found inside changed me forever. Scott Brennan's reports documented nearly 3 years of escalating financial desperation. Secret casino trips, private loans, collection threats, forged preliminary signatures, photographs of Eric meeting known gambling intermediaries. Then I found recorded phone transcripts. One conversation stopped my heart completely. Eric speaking to someone named Nathan Cole. I'll have access soon, Eric whispered angrily. A rough male voice answered, You said that 2 months ago. My father's health is declining. I physically recoiled from the screen. Oh God. No more delays, Nathan warned coldly. You either pay or things become unpleasant. My breathing became shallow. Then Eric said something that made me feel truly sick. There are assets my mother doesn't even know about yet. Spain. He had suspected hidden property all along, and he was waiting for Michael to die. I pushed the laptop away violently and stumbled onto the balcony, gasping for air. The sea breeze hit my face while nausea rolled through my body. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be my son. But it was. And somehow the most painful part wasn't the greed. It was the patience, the quiet calculation, the way Eric discussed Michael's failing health like a financial timeline instead of a tragedy. I stood there crying beside the Mediterranean for nearly 20 minutes before my phone finally rang. Unknown number. For one irrational second, I feared it was Eric somehow finding me. Hands shaking, I answered cautiously. Hello, Mrs. Hayes? The male voice was unfamiliar. Yes, this is Judge Harold Whitman's clerk from Franklin County Probate Court. My blood ran cold instantly. We've been attempting to contact you regarding an emergency competency petition filed by your son, Eric Hayes. The world around me seemed to tilt. What your son claims you may be mentally unstable and currently missing. I stopped breathing. Then the clerk delivered the sentence that changed everything. There's a hearing scheduled for next week concerning temporary control of your assets. For several seconds after the court clerk spoke, I couldn't form words. I stood frozen on the balcony overlooking the Mediterranean while cold panic spread through my body like poison. Mrs. Hayes, the clerk, repeated gently. Yes, I whispered finally. The hearing is scheduled for Tuesday morning. Your son filed an emergency petition claiming concern for your safety and mental condition. Concern. Always concern. Everything sounded so reasonable when spoken formally. So compassionate. So civilized. That was the terrifying part. Real control rarely arrives screaming. It arrives wearing sympathy. I'm not missing, I said weakly. The clerk hesitated carefully. Your son stated you disappeared unexpectedly after showing signs of cognitive instability. I closed my eyes. Cognitive instability. There it was again. The same language, the same script. Every conversation with Vanessa suddenly replayed in my mind like evidence. She left home confused. She forgets things. She's emotionally unstable. She shouldn't be alone. Brick by brick, they had been constructing this story for months, and now they were presenting it to a court. When do I need to appear? I asked. As soon as possible, ma'am. The judge may issue temporary authority if you fail to respond. Temporary authority. The phrase made my stomach turn, because we both knew temporary could become permanent very quickly once someone gained control of finances, medical decisions, and property access. After hanging up, I immediately called Diane. She answered on the first ring. They filed. Already, didn't they? Her voice sounded exhausted rather than surprised. Yes. I explained everything while pacing the small Spanish kitchen. When I finished, Diane went quiet for several seconds. Then she sighed softly. He moved faster than I expected. What happens if I don't return? They could grant temporary conservatorship authority. My knees nearly gave out. You mean he could control everything? Potentially. Yes. I gripped the counter hard enough for my knuckles to ache. My home, my bank accounts, my medical decisions, everything. And suddenly I realized something horrifying. Eric probably believed he was only days away from winning. That realization changed something inside me, because until then, I had still been operating from fear. Now fear began transforming into anger, real anger, the kind born from finally understanding someone intends to erase you. What do we do? I asked quietly. Diane's answer surprised me. We let the hearing happen. I blinked. What? We don't stop it. That makes no sense. It makes perfect sense, she replied calmly. Right now, Eric thinks he controls the narrative. That confidence makes people careless. I sat down slowly. You want him comfortable? Yes. Diane's voice sharpened slightly. Beth listened carefully. Eric has spent months painting you as unstable. Let him continue believing you're vulnerable. My pulse quickened. Then slowly, I understood. If we fought too early, Eric would become cautious, defensive, prepared. But if he believed he was winning, he might expose everything himself. What about the Spain property? I whispered. He still doesn't have proof. Diane paused. And that matters. For the next 2 days, I remained inside the Valencia house, reviewing evidence Michael left behind. Every file revealed another piece of the nightmare. More debts, more lies, more manipulation. One report documented Eric attempting to pressure Michael into restructuring inheritance terms during a hospital stay after a cardiac episode 18 months earlier. Another described multiple creditors contacting him privately at work. But the worst discovery came late Sunday evening. I found copies of text messages between Eric and Vanessa. Not romantic messages, strategic ones. Vanessa. She trusts guilt more than logic. Eric. Then we keep applying pressure. Vanessa. Once paperwork is signed, everything gets easier. My chest physically hurt reading those words, because suddenly I understood something painful. This wasn't chaos. This was coordinated. Vanessa wasn't simply supporting Eric. She was helping direct him. That night, I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning, I walked down to the beach, wrapped in Michael's sweater, while cold waves rolled softly onto shore. The moon reflected silver across the water. Years ago, Michael and I walked this exact beach, laughing about retirement dreams. Now I stood there alone, trying to accept that my own child intended to legally dismantle my life. I whispered into the darkness before I even realized I was speaking. Where did I lose him? No answer came. Only wind. Monday morning, Diane called again. Eric gave an interview to police. Fear shot through me instantly. What he reported concerned that you may be vulnerable and traveling in a confused state. I stared at the wall silently. He was escalating further. Do they know where I am? No, at least not yet. Diane lowered her voice slightly. But there's more. My stomach tightened. Eric submitted affidavits from several people. I already knew. Carol, Vanessa, maybe even Dr. Mercer. People repeating carefully planted stories about confusion and instability. They're building emotional credibility, Diane explained. Not medical proof, emotional perception. Tears burned behind my eyes again. How did this happen? Diane answered quietly. Because decent people struggle imagining manipulation inside families. That was true. Every single person Eric approached probably believed they were helping protect a grieving widow, not assisting in a legal ambush. Then Diane said something unexpected. Judge Whitman is old school. What does that mean? It means he dislikes opportunistic conservatorship cases. Hope flickered weakly inside me. But we still need evidence presented carefully. I looked toward Michael's laptop sitting open on the kitchen table. We have evidence. Yes, Diane replied. And now we need timing. Timing. That word stayed with me all day. By Tuesday morning, the hearing was less than 24 hours away. And still, I hadn't decided something important, whether I could emotionally survive seeing Eric in court. Because no matter what he'd done, no matter what evidence existed, part of me still remembered holding him as a baby. That's the terrible thing about motherhood. Love doesn't disappear just because truth arrives. Late that afternoon, I received another phone call, this time from Eric himself. I nearly didn't answer, but eventually I forced myself to. Mom? His voice sounded shaky, performing worry. I've been terrified. I closed my eyes. You filed legal papers against me. Because you vanished, I needed space. You disappeared after showing signs of instability. The speed of his response stunned me. Not emotional, prepared. Like he'd rehearsed the exact phrasing repeatedly. I'm fine. Then tell me where you are. Silence. Then Eric's tone softened dramatically. Mom, please. We're trying to help you. We. Always we. Vanessa standing invisibly behind every sentence. I don't need help. You're not thinking clearly. There it was. Direct now. No more subtlety. You abandon your home. You stopped answering consistently. You're emotionally compromised. I listened in disbelief. This wasn't my son speaking anymore. This was a man constructing a legal argument. Then suddenly, beneath all the fake concern, something darker slipped through. You can't handle things alone anymore. Not shouldn't. Can't. A declaration. Ownership hidden inside pity. I finally spoke quietly. What happens if the judge believes you? Eric went silent for one dangerous second too long. Then he answered softly, then I can protect you properly. The coldness beneath that sentence chilled me to the bone. Not love. Control. I understood it completely now. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I stopped feeling guilty for preparing to fight back. Because protecting myself no longer felt selfish. It felt necessary for survival. That night, while sitting alone in the little Spanish house Michael once called our escape, I made my final decision. I would return to Ohio. I would walk into that courtroom. And I would let Eric discover exactly how badly he had underestimated the woman he thought he could erase. I arrived back in Ohio the night before the hearing. Cold rain streaked across the airport windows, while Diane drove us silently through downtown Columbus toward a small hotel near the courthouse. I didn't go home. Diane insisted it was safer not to. The word safer no longer sounded dramatic to me anymore. It sounded practical, necessary. As we drove through familiar streets, my chest tightened painfully. Everything looked the same. The grocery store where Michael used to buy flowers every Friday. The diner where we celebrated our anniversaries. The church parking lot where Eric once learned to drive. How could ordinary places continue existing normally while my entire life collapsed underneath them? At the hotel, Diane spread documents across the small room's dining table like a battlefield map. Recordings, financial reports, private investigator files, copies of text messages, the flash drive from Spain, evidence stacked carefully into neat folders. Proof. So much proof. And yet, I still felt terrified, because none of it erased the most painful truth: tomorrow I would be fighting my own son in court. Around midnight, Diane looked up from her paperwork. "You should try sleeping." I almost laughed. Instead, I asked the question haunting me for days. "Do you think he feels guilty?" Diane paused for a long moment, then answered honestly. "I think Eric convinced himself this is justified." That somehow hurt more, because monsters are easier to hate than people who slowly corrupt themselves one compromise at a time. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. My face looked older, harder, not broken exactly, but transformed. Grief had changed me. Betrayal finished the job. I wore a navy blue dress Michael always loved and pearl earrings he gave me on our 40th anniversary. Armor disguised as elegance. When we arrived at the Franklin County Probate Courthouse, reporters weren't there. No dramatic crowds, no television cameras, just ordinary people carrying coffee cups beneath gray skies. That almost made everything feel sadder somehow, because family destruction rarely looks dramatic from the outside. Most of the time, it happens quietly in ordinary buildings, while strangers walk past without noticing. Inside the courtroom hallway, I saw Eric immediately, and for one terrible second, instinct almost overpowered reason, because he still looked like my son. Same dark hair, same broad shoulders, same nervous habit of rubbing his jaw when anxious. But then I noticed Vanessa beside him, whispering urgently while organizing folders. And suddenly, I remembered everything. The lies, the recordings, the manipulation. Eric looked up. The moment he saw me, all color drained from his face. Pure shock. For several seconds, he genuinely looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Mom?" His voice cracked. "Good." Vanessa recovered faster. Much faster. "Beth," she said carefully, "thank God you're all right." The performance had already started. I stared at her without speaking. Eric walked toward me slowly. "Where have you been?" His voice sounded panicked now. Not loving, panicked. Because I had disrupted his timeline. I needed time to think. "You disappeared. You filed legal action against me." People in the hallway began glancing toward us nervously. Eric lowered his voice quickly. "We thought you were confused?" "No," I answered calmly. "You hoped I was." Vanessa immediately stepped forward. "Beth, this isn't helping your case." "My case." Interesting phrase, as though I were already the accused party. Diane appeared beside me, then cool and composed as always. "Good morning, Eric." His expression darkened instantly. "You knew where she was?" Diane ignored the question. "We'll discuss everything inside." The hearing began 20 minutes later. Judge Harold Whitman looked exactly how I imagined. Late 70s. Sharp eyes, weathered face, the kind of man who had seen every version of human dishonesty imaginable. Eric sat at the petitioner's table beside Vanessa and their attorney. I sat beside Diane. The distance between us felt larger than the entire courtroom. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Hayes, you filed an emergency petition, claiming your mother may be mentally incompetent and vulnerable." "Yes, Your Honor." Eric's voice sounded emotional now. Practiced emotional. "We've been extremely worried." Judge Whitman nodded slightly. "And your mother disappeared unexpectedly." "Yes." Vanessa dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "Oscar-worthy performance," Eric continued. "She became forgetful after my father died. Confused, emotionally unstable." There were those words again, repeated so often they almost sounded real. Their attorney presented affidavits next. Carol Jenkins, Dr. Mercer, Vanessa. Several statements describing concern for my memory and emotional condition. Listening to strangers discuss me like I was no longer fully human nearly shattered my composure. She struggles with basic decisions. She appears increasingly isolated. She forgets conversations. Every sentence carefully designed to sound compassionate instead of predatory. Then Dr. Mercer testified remotely by video call. I observed signs consistent with cognitive decline exacerbated by grief. Consistent with, not diagnosed, not confirmed, just suggested. Diane remained perfectly calm throughout all of it, taking notes, waiting. Finally, Judge Whitman turned toward me. Mrs. Hayes, would you like to respond? My hands trembled slightly as I stood. Every eye in the courtroom focused on me, including Eric's. For one brief second, I saw genuine uncertainty in his face, because until now, he truly believed I would appear weak, confused, overwhelmed. Instead, I looked directly at the judge and spoke clearly. Yes, Your Honor, I would. Diane rose beside me. Before my client responds fully, we would like to submit several exhibits into evidence. The atmosphere changed instantly. I watched Eric's posture tighten. The first exhibit was the audio recording from Dr. Mercer's visit. As the recording played through courtroom speakers, silence spread heavily across the room. Vanessa's face slowly lost color. Dr. Mercer's leading questions echoed clearly. Vanessa repeatedly speaking for me, Eric describing concerns strategically. Then came the final part. This could work in court. Complete silence. Then Eric's recorded reply. That's what we're hoping. The courtroom atmosphere shifted immediately. Judge Whitman removed his glasses slowly. Eric looked physically ill. Vanessa leaned toward their attorney, whispering frantically. But Diane wasn't finished. Next came evidence from Scott Brennan's investigation. Debt records, casino reports, loan defaults, attempts to access Michael's retirement accounts before his death. The judge's expression darkened more with every document. Then Diane introduced the text messages between Eric and Vanessa. She trusts guilt more than logic. We keep applying pressure. I watched Eric's entire body stiffen. The mask was cracking now. Fast. Their attorney attempted objections repeatedly, but the damage was already happening. Then Diane delivered the final blow. Your Honor, we would also like to call an additional witness. The courtroom doors opened behind us, and a large man in a dark gray coat walked inside slowly. Nathan Cole. I recognized him instantly from the investigative photos. Eric did too, because the moment he saw him, absolute terror flashed across my son's face. Not embarrassment, not anger, fear, real fear. Nathan sat in the witness chair heavily. Judge Whitman frowned slightly. State your relationship to the petitioner. Nathan looked directly at Eric before answering. He owes me approximately $200,000. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Nathan continued calmly. He repeatedly promised repayment after gaining access to family assets. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Their attorney looked ready to collapse. Then Nathan delivered the sentence that destroyed whatever remained of Eric's credibility. He told me his mother wouldn't be a problem much longer. The air left my lungs. Across the courtroom, Eric stood abruptly. That's a lie. But his voice cracked with panic. And for the first time since this nightmare began, everyone finally saw the truth I'd been living inside. Not a worried son, not a loving caretaker. A desperate man trying to seize control before his entire life collapsed. Judge Whitman looked toward Eric with cold disappointment. And in that exact moment, I realized my son's carefully constructed world was finally beginning to burn down around him. The courtroom fell into complete chaos after Nathan Cole testified. Eric stood frozen beside his attorney, pale and visibly shaking, while whispers spread across the gallery behind us. Vanessa grabbed his arm tightly, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I noticed something important. She looked afraid too. Not concerned. Afraid. Because people like Vanessa only stay calm while they believe they're controlling the situation. And control was slipping away fast. Judge Whitman raised his voice sharply. Enough. Silence crashed over the room immediately. The judge looked toward Nathan Cole with visible disgust. Mr. Cole, are you claiming the petitioner intended to gain access to his mother's estate under false pretenses? Nathan shrugged coldly. I'm claiming he told me he'd have control over her money soon. Eric suddenly exploded. He's lying, but panic ruined the performance. You can always hear desperation when truth corners someone. Judge Whitman turned slowly toward Eric. Sit down, Mr. Hayes. For one dangerous second, I thought Eric might refuse. His face had changed completely now. Gone was the polished, concerned son. Gone was the patient caretaker. What remained looked exhausted, cornered, angry. Eventually he sat. Vanessa leaned toward him, whispering frantically, while their attorney wiped sweat from his forehead. Then Judge Whitman looked at me. Mrs. Hayes, did you voluntarily leave the country? Yes, Your Honor. Were you confused or unaware of your actions? No. Did your son know your location? No. The judge nodded slowly. Then he asked the question that broke my heart most. Why did you feel the need to hide from your own child? The courtroom became painfully quiet. I looked at Eric, really looked at him, and for one brief moment I saw my little boy underneath all the damage. The child who once begged me to check under his bed for monsters. The teenager who cried after failing his driver's test. The young man who danced with me at his wedding while Michael took pictures. Then I remembered the recordings, the manipulation, the lies, and the fear returned, because the truth was simple. My son had become the monster he once feared. I answered softly, because I realized he was trying to erase my independence. Eric's eyes filled instantly. Whether from guilt or rage, I honestly couldn't tell anymore. Judge Whitman continued reviewing documents for several minutes while the courtroom remained silent except for turning pages. Then Diane introduced the final evidence package. The messages between Eric and Vanessa, printed large enough for everyone to see. She trusts guilt more than logic. Once paperwork is signed, everything gets easier. We keep applying pressure. Vanessa finally broke first. That's out of context, she snapped suddenly. The sharpness in her voice startled everyone. Judge Whitman looked up immediately. Excuse me. Vanessa straightened quickly, attempting to recover composure. We were trying to help her transition safely. Transition. Another sanitized word, hiding something ugly underneath. Diane spoke calmly. Would you describe secretly copying house keys as helping Vanessa froze? The silence alone answered the question. Diane continued. Would you describe spreading false claims regarding memory decline as helping no response? Would you describe arranging a strategic competency evaluation without Mrs. Hayes understanding its purpose as helping Vanessa's face flushed red? Eric suddenly interrupted. We were scared. His voice cracked violently, finally. Real emotion. Not polished concern, not rehearsed sympathy. Fear. We thought she couldn't handle things anymore. He continued desperately. Dad handled everything for years. That's not true, I said quietly. Eric looked at me sharply. You don't understand finances. I understand enough to know when someone's trying to steal control of my life. The words hit him physically. I saw it, like a slap. Then suddenly, Eric's composure shattered completely. You think I wanted this? He snapped. You think I enjoyed begging people for money? The courtroom stiffened. Even Vanessa looked shocked he said it out loud. Eric stood abruptly again. I was drowning. His voice echoed across the courtroom. You and Dad always judged me like I was some failure? No, I whispered. We rescued you. That silence afterward felt enormous, because deep down, Eric knew I was right. Tears filled his eyes instantly, but not soft tears, angry tears. I had nothing left. You had us, I answered. No, he snapped bitterly. You had Dad. I was always just the disappointment standing beside him. The confession stunned me. For one heartbreaking second, I finally saw the wounded man beneath all the greed. A man who spent years comparing himself to his father until shame rotted into resentment. But pain does not excuse cruelty, and heartbreak does not justify destruction. Judge Whitman's voice cut through the tension sharply. Mr. Hayes, sit down immediately. Eric obeyed this time, defeated, breathing hard. Vanessa stared straight ahead now, completely silent. And suddenly, I understood something else too. She wasn't protecting Eric anymore. She was protecting herself. The judge removed his glasses slowly. I have reviewed enough evidence to reach a preliminary conclusion. The courtroom held its breath. This petition appears deeply compromised by conflicts of interest, manipulation, and financial motivation. Relief nearly collapsed my body, but the judge wasn't finished. He turned toward Eric directly. Your behavior toward your mother raises serious ethical concerns. Eric stared downward silently. Judge Whitman continued coldly. You attempted to establish a narrative of incompetence, unsupported by legitimate medical evidence, while simultaneously facing significant financial distress. Every sentence landed like another stone. Then came the final blow. This court denies the petition entirely. A strange sound escaped my throat, half sob, half exhale. I hadn't realized how tightly fear had gripped my body until that moment. But Judge Whitman continued further. I am also referring portions of this matter for additional review regarding potential financial misconduct and abuse of process. Eric looked up sharply in panic. Vanessa closed her eyes. Their attorney looked ready to disappear through the floor. The hearing was over. But emotionally, it felt like the collapse of an entire lifetime. People slowly began leaving the courtroom. Whispers everywhere now. Sympathy no longer aimed at Eric. Suspicion replacing concern. I remained seated because my legs no longer felt stable enough to stand. Diane squeezed my shoulder gently. You did it. Did I? It didn't feel victorious. It felt tragic. Across the courtroom, Eric stood alone, while Vanessa argued quietly with their attorney near the doors. And then something happened I'll never forget. Vanessa walked away from him, not dramatically, not emotionally. She simply picked up her purse and left the courtroom without looking back. Eric watched her go with complete disbelief. And in that exact moment, I think he finally understood something terrible. The people he betrayed his family for were never truly loyal to him either. Eventually, Eric turned toward me slowly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered the most painful words I have ever heard in my life. Mom. I didn't think it would go this far. Tears filled my eyes instantly, because I believed him. Not the lies, not the manipulation. That sentence. He truly never believed consequences would arrive. Years of rescue had taught him someone would always save him before collapse became real. But Michael was gone now, and I was finally done sacrificing myself to protect the illusion of who my son used to be. I stood slowly, then walked toward him. Eric looked terrified suddenly. Not of prison, not of debt, of losing me. You made choices, I said softly. Tears slid down his face. So did I. He reached toward me instinctively, but I stepped back, and that hurt both of us more than anything else in that courtroom. Because for the first time in his life, I was no longer rescuing him from himself. After the hearing, I didn't go home immediately. I couldn't. The idea of walking back into that house, the same house where Eric copied keys, searched through drawers, and slowly built a legal case against me, made my chest tighten. So Diane drove me to a quiet cafe near the courthouse instead. For nearly 20 minutes, neither of us spoke. I simply sat there staring out the window while snow began falling lightly across downtown Columbus. Tiny white flakes drifting through gray air. Peaceful. The world always looks strangely calm after devastation. Finally, Diane set a folder beside my coffee cup. What's this? I asked quietly. Documents Michael prepared years ago. I looked at her sharply. There's more. Diane gave me a tired smile. Michael was very thorough. Of course he was. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were trust documents, property protections, revised estate structures, everything carefully organized. And there near the top page, I saw the words, the Beth Hayes Independent Living Trust. My breath caught. Diane folded her hands together. After Eric's financial problems escalated, Michael restructured several assets to protect you from coercion or manipulation. I swallowed hard. So Eric can't touch the Spain house. No. What about this house in Ohio? Also protected now. For the first time in months, real relief moved through my body. Not temporary relief. Safety. Michael truly thought of everything. Tears filled my eyes again. I didn't know he was carrying all of this alone. Diane's expression softened. He loved you enough to prepare for the worst. That sentence stayed with me all day. Loved you enough to prepare for the worst. Most people think love is softness, but sometimes love looks like paperwork, like hidden documents, like difficult decisions made quietly to protect someone long after you're gone. 2 days later, I finally returned home. The moment I stepped through the front door, grief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. Everything looked exactly the same. The frame photographs, the hallway runner rug, Michael's reading glasses still resting beside his recliner, but the house no longer felt innocent. Now it held shadows too, memories tangled with betrayal. I walked room by room, slowly touching furniture, like I was reacquainting myself with my own life. Then I reached Michael's office. For several minutes, I simply stood in the doorway. This room had once represented safety. Now it represented secrets, sacrifice, fear. I sat down at Michael's desk carefully and opened the top drawer. Inside lay one of his old fountain pens, the blue one he used every Sunday while paying bills. I picked it up gently, and suddenly I started crying again. Not because of Eric this time, because I finally understood how exhausted Michael must have been near the end, trying to protect me, trying to save our son, trying to hold the family together while watching it quietly crack apart. A week after the hearing, Eric called. I let it ring 3 times before answering. His voice sounded smaller somehow, less certain. Mom, yes. Long silence. Then I'm sorry. I closed my eyes. Part of me had waited months to hear those words, but now that they finally came, they changed almost nothing. Are you? I asked softly. Another silence. Then Eric exhaled shakily. I don't even know who I became. The honesty in his voice frightened me more than manipulation ever did, because collapse had finally stripped away the performance. What remained was emptiness. I never wanted to hurt you. You did? My voice stayed calm. Not angry anymore. Just true. Eric started crying quietly then. Real crying. Not courtroom emotion. Not strategic guilt. Brokenness. They're coming after me, he whispered. Nathan Cole, creditors, investigations, consequences. The entire structure of lies was finally collapsing. And for one dangerous moment, maternal instinct surged through me again. The old instinct. Fix it. Save him. Protect your child. I nearly offered help automatically. Then Michael's voice echoed in my memory. Please don't destroy yourself trying to save someone who no longer wants to be saved. I gripped the phone tighter. I can't rescue you anymore, Eric. His crying stopped instantly. Shock replaced grief. What I love you, I whispered. But I cannot keep sacrificing myself to protect your choices. The silence afterward felt endless. Then came the sentence I knew was coming. You're choosing money over me. I almost smiled sadly, because there it was. The final manipulation. Guilt. Always guilt. No, I answered quietly. I'm choosing survival. He breathed heavily into the phone. Then anger slowly returned. You don't understand what pressure does to people. I understand perfectly. You abandoned me. No, I replied softly. Your father and I spent years trying to save you. Tears filled my eyes again. But eventually you started confusing rescue with entitlement. Silence. Because he recognized Michael's words immediately. You told her everything, he whispered bitterly. No, I answered. Your father prepared me for the truth. That hurt him. I heard it. Not because Michael exposed him, because deep down, Eric realized his father stopped trusting him before he died. The conversation ended shortly afterward. No screaming, no dramatic threats, just exhaustion. When I hung up, I sat quietly in the living room while snow drifted softly outside the windows. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to fully accept something painful. Loving someone does not require surrendering your life to their destruction. That realization changed me. Over the following month, Diane helped finalize additional protections around my finances and properties. I changed locks, updated legal directives, installed security cameras, practical things, necessary things. And slowly, I stopped feeling ashamed about them. Because older women are taught something dangerous. We are taught that protecting ourselves is selfish, that boundaries are cruel, that saying no to our own children somehow makes us failures as mothers. But survival is not cruelty. Boundaries are not betrayal. One evening near Christmas, I found an old photo album while cleaning upstairs. Inside were pictures from Eric's childhood: birthdays, camping trips, soccer games, Michael teaching him how to fish. I cried looking through every single photo, not because I regretted protecting myself, because mourning a living child feels different than mourning the dead. There's no funeral, no final goodbye, just the slow grief of watching someone become unrecognizable. A few days later, Diane visited for coffee. As snow fell outside the kitchen windows, she asked quietly, "What will you do now?" I looked around the house slowly, at the life Michael and I built together. Then I thought about Spain. The sunlight, the sea, the little balcony overlooking the Mediterranean. Peace. Real peace. I think I said softly, "I finally want to live instead of just survive." Diane smiled gently. Michael would have loved hearing that. That night, after she left, I stood alone in the kitchen and whispered something into the quiet house I never imagined I'd say aloud. I'm going back to Spain. Not to hide, not to run, but because, for the first time in years, I wanted something for myself, and I was finally no longer willing to apologize for it. The next spring, I returned to Spain with 2 large suitcases, Michael's old fountain pen, and a version of myself I barely recognized anymore. The woman who first arrived in Valencia months earlier had been frightened, hunted, and emotionally shattered. The woman stepping off the plane now was still wounded, but she was no longer powerless. As the taxi carried me along the coastline toward the little cream-colored house, sunlight poured across the Mediterranean in brilliant flashes of blue and gold. For the first time in a very long time, I felt something unfamiliar inside my chest. Peace. Not complete peace. Grief doesn't disappear that neatly, but enough peace to breathe again. I opened the front door slowly and stood there smiling through tears. The house no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a beginning. Over the following weeks, I settled into a rhythm that slowly stitched parts of me back together. Every morning I walked to a nearby bakery for fresh bread and coffee. The owner, an elderly woman named Sophia, spoke almost no English, and my Spanish remained terrible despite years of trying to learn. But somehow we understood each other anyway. Loneliness recognizes loneliness. Healing recognizes healing too. I began sleeping with the balcony doors open so I could hear the ocean at night. I planted flowers outside the kitchen window. I repainted the upstairs bedroom pale blue because Michael always said the room needed more color. Little things, ordinary things, the kind grief steals from you until you consciously reclaim them. Some afternoons, I sat beside the water for hours, thinking about my life, about marriage, motherhood, forgiveness. I thought often about the version of myself who spent years believing love meant endless sacrifice. Women my age were raised that way. Endure quietly, give endlessly, forgive automatically, protect the family at all costs. But nobody teaches us what to do when protecting the family starts destroying us. That truth changed me more than betrayal itself. Eric called occasionally during those first months. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. The conversations remained awkward and fragile. His financial situation worsened significantly after the court hearing. Vanessa eventually filed for divorce once investigations into their debts expanded. That part didn't surprise me. People built on appearances rarely survive real collapse together. One evening, Eric called while I was cooking dinner. His voice sounded exhausted. "I found Dad's old fishing jacket today." The comment caught me off guard. "He kept it in the garage," Eric continued quietly. "Still smelled like him." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then my son started crying softly. Not dramatic crying, not manipulative crying. Grief. Real grief. And suddenly I realized something heartbreaking. For all his obsession with money, Eric had never properly mourned his father. He buried fear beneath greed, shame beneath control, but grief always waits eventually. "I miss him too," I whispered. That conversation lasted nearly an hour. Not about debt, not about court, not about inheritance, just memories. Michael burning hamburgers every 4th of July because he got distracted talking. Michael falling asleep during movies. Michael pretending not to cry at Eric's college graduation while openly sobbing into a napkin. For the first time in years, Eric sounded like himself again. Not fully healed, not transformed overnight, but human. After we hung up, I cried for a long time alone in the Spanish kitchen. Because forgiveness is complicated. People think forgiveness means pretending pain never happened. It doesn't. Forgiveness simply means refusing to let hatred consume the rest of your life. And I was too old to spend my remaining years poisoned by bitterness. That didn't mean trust returned. Some things never fully return once broken. But compassion slowly did. A few months later, I made a decision Michael would have loved. I opened part of the Valencia house to older women traveling alone after loss. Nothing formal at first, just quiet invitations through church groups and widow support communities. Women arrived carrying grief in different forms. One lost her husband after 50 years of marriage. Another escaped emotionally abusive adult children. One woman simply said she no longer remembered who she was outside caregiving. I understood every one of them. We cooked together, walked beside the sea, drank wine on the balcony while sharing stories most people grow uncomfortable hearing. Stories about aging, loneliness, fear, betrayal, and survival. Slowly, the little house Michael once bought as my escape became something else entirely. A refuge, not just for me, for women like me. One afternoon, nearly a year after the court hearing, I received a letter from Eric, an actual handwritten letter. Inside was a photograph of him standing beside Michael's grave, holding flowers. And beneath it, only one sentence: "I finally understand what Dad was trying to protect." I stared at those words for a very long time. Then I placed the photograph gently beside my bed. Because healing rarely arrives through grand, dramatic moments, sometimes it arrives quietly, one truthful sentence at a time. That summer, I turned 69 years old. I celebrated alone on the balcony overlooking the Mediterranean with a slice of lemon cake and a candle stuck crookedly in the center. And for the first time in decades, I made a wish that belonged entirely to me. Not for my husband, not for my son, not for keeping peace inside a broken family, for myself. I wished for whatever years remained to feel honest. The sun slowly disappeared beneath the horizon, while waves rolled softly against the shore below. And in that moment, I thought about the frightened widow I once was, the woman sitting alone in Ohio, believing her life had ended the day her husband died. She had no idea something else was waiting on the other side of survival. Strength. Not loud strength. Not angry strength. The quiet kind. The kind built when a woman finally realizes her life still belongs to her. Even after grief. Even after betrayal. Even after family breaks her heart. Sometimes I still miss the old version of Eric. Sometimes I still ache for Michael so badly it steals the air from my lungs. Some wounds never fully disappear. But I learned something important through all of this. Love should never require you to disappear in order to keep someone else comfortable. And if there's one thing I thank God for every single day, it's that I stayed quiet about the house in Spain long enough to finally hear the truth. Not just about my son, about myself too. After everything that happened, I spent a long time asking myself one painful question. How many women lose themselves trying to save everyone else? So many of us are taught that being a good mother means endless sacrifice, endless forgiveness, endless understanding. We excuse bad behavior because we remember the child someone used to be. We carry guilt for setting boundaries. We confuse love with surrender, but love should never cost you your dignity. And protecting yourself does not make you cruel. What happened between me and Eric broke my heart. There's no pretty way to say that. A part of me will probably always grieve the son I thought I had. But another part of me finally woke up. I learned that survival sometimes requires painful honesty. Sometimes the people we love most are also the people capable of hurting us most deeply when fear, greed, or desperation take over. That doesn't mean we stop loving them. It means we stop destroying ourselves to protect them from consequences. And maybe that's the real lesson. You can love someone and still say no. You can forgive someone and still protect yourself. You can survive betrayal and still build a beautiful life afterward. If my story touched your heart, please leave a comment below. I'd truly love to know, have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and protecting someone you love? And if you're watching tonight, tell me where you're from and what time it is there. Sometimes strangers understand our pain better than the people closest to us. And if you believe stories like this matter, please like and subscribe. You never know who might need the reminder that their life still belongs to them too.